on the first bus, it doesn't matter. So, but I do not believe that the rider of the white horse is the Christ. I believe he's the Antichrist. And I believe his journey was all about setting up from the time of Christ until the present day, and still active today, is to continue to deceive America and deceive the church and deceive the individual and deceive the world in its entirety. So we talked about the great deception. And the next slide, we talked about the fact that the deception all about was to lead to war. The next slide. And then to the red horse, the second seal being broken was the red horse, and that represented war. And we talked about the fact that the Antichrist has set up all the things necessary for him to ride. And when we talked about the red horse, we talked about the fact that he came not just to cause wars in different countries, but to wars among people and brethren, and to separate and continue to separate. Next slide. And then all of the white horse and the red horse is in the end times is to introduce the seducing spirits that are marching at the same time. And the next slide. The white horse, deception, the red horse, war. These two lead to the third horse and rider, and the seducing spirit, go ahead, is the black horse, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The black horse represents famine. In Revelation chapter 6, when the Lamb opens the third seal, a rider on the black horse appears, and the meaning of the black horse is just this, famine. And the third horse is black, and it is... famine, by the way, is was well known in the Roman Empire in the first century in AD 90. And I thought this was interesting when I looked at it. It said that there was such a glut of wine and lack of grain that Domitian issued an edict forbidding new vineyards and commanding the destruction of half of the present vineyards to the land could be converted to grain production. Suetonius in Asia Minor protested this edict, and it was eventually reversed in AD 93. But it is possible that John was referring to this when he talked about one of the little parts of that, when he talked about the black horse, and it says that a penny, a day's wages for a loaf of bread, and then he ends up saying, but don't touch the oil in the wine. And so the writer is given a set of scales to measure the grain. And I think that's interesting, the idea of the measure, because it would suggest that somebody is in control. Somebody's in control of the food. Somebody's in control of how much people receive. And if this is indeed a relation to the last days, and it certainly may be, we start figuring, how is that even possible that such a breadbasket like America could be in a situation where they wouldn't have enough food to feed the people. Next slide, please. So when the Lamb opens the third seal, the rider is seen. Next slide. And the natural resort of war, and we just went through that, is famine. The more wars you have, the more susceptible you are to famine. And the third horse is a black horse, clearly intended to represent famine. The next one, please. And the irony of this famine is that the luxury items, the oil and the wine, are not in short supply. These things are plentiful, but the people cannot spend all their money, or they cannot afford them, since they have to spend all their money on just getting the necessities. Did you ever think that we'd ever see a day that we would only buy the things that are necessary, but we wouldn't want to spend any money on necessities? Actually, it happens quite often, more so than you realize. We have gone through downturns. Whenever there's a downturn, people are more interested in the things that they have to have, the food that they need to eat, their rent payment, electricity, all those things. And they don't. Car sales go way down. Everything begins, or those luxury items. People start saying, well, I'm going to keep my car time infinitum. And we have people in our church that are running cars right now that are well over 200,000 miles, 240, 250,000 miles, because they don't want to get rid of them, because they don't want to take a chance right now on buying a new car. Now, that sounds good, but it also is very, very, how would you say, it increases our potential to not have things too. Because if you're not buying and nobody is selling, well, then jobs begin to fall. I know a lot of people that have gone to work and they think, okay, I'm going back to work, but they found out that there's nobody coming back to work and or coming to their place of work. And so they went back to work just to be laid off again. And it's very disconcerting because of the fact if you're feeding your family, it's a very fearful time. Next slide, please. So Greg Beale suggests that inflated prices for food had Christians specifically in mind. He argued that the second horse was not war in general, but rather a persecution of Christians getting ready for the day that we're in. Well, I do believe that the red horse or warfare has been aimed at Christians. And I also think that for us to just consider that this famine may be directed only at Christians is not probably the best thought process. I think it's going to be worldwide. I think that nobody is going to be exempt from this in the future. And we're going to talk about some things that might cause it to happen. And we don't think about those. Next slide, please. We usually don't. I don't think just Christians will suffer. However, the idea of a scale would suggest global control. I am not a globalist. I don't think that this is a good idea. Somebody was telling me they went to one of the stores that sell fishing supplies. Yes, Cabela's. Thank you very much. They were down at Cabela's, and they wanted to go and get a new rod and reel because it's important to have the best of equipment when you go fishing. I don't need the best of equipment when I go fishing because I know that I am not going to catch anything. No matter what I have, it's not going to matter. So buying that stuff means nothing to me. But they were very excited about going. When they got there, there's like 5 or 6 of the guys that sell the fishing equipment was standing in front of at least 8, 9 rods and reels. And he said, boy, that's a lot of help. He said, well, we don't have nothing to do. He said, why? This is Cabela's right here in Columbus. He said, because almost all of our fishing supplies comes from China. Their lures, the reels, all this comes. And, of course, you know, China's mad at Trump. And since he's mad at Trump, a lot of that stuff is not coming. Well, we don't manufacture much here in America. We send it out to other places. Now, we can get it cheaper, so that's good, right? Well, the problem with getting it cheaper and it being good, it can also be very bad. And how it becomes very bad is if you're a globalist and you have a problem or a disagreement, you're shut down. Now, it's only fishing equipment. Well, it's only fishing equipment and penicillin and medications and insulin and bandages and masks and clothes and shoes and all of these things that are coming, and our industry has farmed it out to the point where we're now at the mercy of the globalist, or because we're globalists, we're at the mercy of who has the supplies. That can be very, very frightening place for us to be. And it is where the United States is. Now, and I got to tell you, and I get into trouble for this, but I'm just going to say it. Somebody called me today, and they wanted to talk to me about the great speech that Biden gave. And I said, I do not listen to Biden at all. I said, I want you to understand, I think all of them guys in Washington are knuckleheads. So for you to ask me what I think of their speech, I'm already telling you, before I even hear them, I know that the lies that are spewed out of their mouth are of no consequence to me. I'm aggravated right now a lot because of the fact that we do have a president who's trying to do something. But he has no Democrats and no Republicans behind him. The Democrats hate his guts and want him out, and the Republicans are cowards. And it aggravates me to no end because of the fact that we really need to be bringing some of this stuff back to the United States and making it again right here. It is what our president would like to do. But all he's hit with is continuous, and by the way, we talked about that deception. I don't want to go too far back, but I do want you to understand we have been listening to some of the things that are what's called the underground media, which means true media. And in true media, I don't know, I'm just going to pass this along. England, the United Kingdom, said that the coronavirus should not even be considered an epidemic because of the fact that the death toll is so low. And I listened to a professor from Stafford University this week, and he was talking about the fact that most of the information that is out there is lies, and it is out there in order to continue the COVID thing going so that people don't go back to work. Because they would like to keep everybody off of work until the election is over, because then, well, whoever happens to be running against the current president has got a better shot at winning if nobody's at work. And you say, well, preacher, I don't know that I can agree with that. Well, let me tell you something. There was a lady by the name of Fernando Cortez. No, that's not her name. Iguana Cortez. I'm sure that this is going out right now, and I'll get her name because it's very important. Ipspiddlyoten Uwatan Tu Cortez, I think is her name. What is it? Does anybody know her name? AOC. Hello, AOC. Anyway, she put out on her Twitters, Twinkers, or whatever it was. I don't know all that stuff, you know. I'm just a simple preacher that's barely keeping up with stuff. And she said it's absolutely imperative that we tell the governors to continue this shutdown until after the election. She took it off as soon as she could, but by that time it had already been shared 20,000 times. So we say, well, that's just one person. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the third horse refers to the economic difficulties faced by Christians, suggested by Revelation 2:9. And in addition, those who do not receive the mark later on is going of the beast will not be able or permitted to buy and sell. Next slide. The food-rich country's potential to feed the entire planet makes it hard to imagine a famine extensive enough to thrust the earth into a global crisis. I mean, it's hard for us to understand that, unless, of course, there are things that are already going on. And I wanted to get to that. Let me go to the next one before. I don't want to get behind tonight because I've got a lot to do. So this horrifying scene by the black horse is that this is going to be a worldwide famine. Next slide, please. Ethiopia, where more than 7 million people are in desperate need of emergency food supplies in order to avert starvation, is something that's not in the by and by, but it is something right now. Next slide. Perhaps another 2 million require immediate help in Eritrea. For Africa as a whole, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization declared in March that 23 of the country's 53 countries, almost half, face dire food shortages. Next slide, please. More than 2 million people have died in the past decade in North Korea due to food shortages caused by a combination of flood, drought, and bad government policies created by Kim Jong-il. Now, I'd like to point out, sometimes, I'll get to that in a second. Next slide. We have covered the meaning of the first two horsemen, Revelation, religious deception and war. We came now to the third horseman. What does it pretend for the world? And I think that we need to see that, because this is not limited to Christian, and there is no reason to expect people to starve when we have all this food available and we can transport food across the entire world. And it's easy to dismiss the famine when it's on the other side of the planet or some far-off isolated corner of the globe. It is conceivable famine could spread to impact the wealthy, food-rich countries of the world, and we say, I don't see how that's going to happen. It happens every time that there is a difficulty or an emergency or a catastrophe. As most of you know, every time that if we get bad weather coming in, all the grocery stores are emptied. People rush and they get the milk and bread. don't know why, but they do. It's milk and bread is the most important thing to have. But it's almost immediate. We had this coronavirus. And the reason that some of us gained weight during this time is because we went out and got all the food that was in the grocery store and ate it. Then we had to plant gardens because we know we got to replenish that food someplace, and it just isn't out there anymore. Whenever you go to the store and you can't find pinto beans, that is a catastrophe. This is a sadness. And that was very, very real. Next slide, please. The amount of money suggests food prices about, when he talked about a day's wages, when they figured it out, it would say that food prices would be about 12 times higher than normal. And we still don't see that because we think it's a far off. But you know what? Almost all of the famines that have hit the world so far have been caused by political unrest, not lack of food. Wait. No, because we produce a great deal of food, right? That is true. We do produce a lot of it, but I need you to understand that. Let's go back to one of the plans that Hitler had, and I'm trying to find my facts on that right now because I wanted to share that with you. But he had a plan in which that he would systematically starve certain portions of his population. Like if you were a true German, you would get as much as 85% of the calorie intake that you needed a day. If you weren't German, then that might have, if you were, like Austrian, you may go down to 75%. If you got down to the Jews, 15%, 10%. And he had this plan in place, and we say, oh my gosh, but that was Germany, and it only affected, the Jews that would know. He was doing the same thing with Russia. His idea was that if he could go into Russia and conquer Russia, he could take their fields and it would feed Germany during the war, because Germany could not produce enough food to continue that war machine. So they went to Russia to take over their fields of wheat and so on and so forth. And the idea was to starve. And he was thinking about the possibility, and he had one of his leaders, I'm trying to think of his name, wasn't Garrick, but he put a plan together. It wasn't Goebel either. And he had put a plan together, and he figured, he felt that they would be at least anywhere from 10 to 20 million people would die in Russia from starvation. But that was okay, because Germany would benefit. But that was his plan that he presented to Hitler. And over just the last 150 years, around 100 million people worldwide have died in famines. It's hard for us to understand that. We can't believe that. That's too many people. Starvation wasn't something that just happened. It was something that people did to one another. De Waal, when he was writing about the famines of the world, he said, famines were not natural disasters like earthquakes or hurricanes, but were the product of politics. This is where it gets a little odd and strange when you think about the fact that you cannot trust your government to think about the welfare of the people. Whenever you have the Democrats and the Republicans are more concerned about their own job than the welfare of the people, it is very possible that something like this could certainly hit us, because all these famines that we know of in the past were caused by political difficulties. Matters of fact, some people who are in positions of authority think that they're an expert because they are in positions of authority. Most of you know there was a fella that the Nazi hunger plan of 1941, it was what it was called, by the way. You can look that up if you want to. But and it was a high-level Nazi document that was dated just a few weeks before Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, stated, the war can only be continued if the entire German armed forces are fed from Russia during the third year of the war. As a result, there is no doubt that tens of millions of people will starve to death if we take out from the country whatever we need. That was written on May 2nd, 1941 by Herbert Bach. I couldn't remember his name. I got his name so that you can look that up. I knew I wrote it down someplace, but I couldn't remember where I had it. He calculated that for the plan to succeed, all urban populations of the European Soviet Union, 30 million men, women, and children must be starved to death in order for Germany to continue its war. That wasn't lack of food. It was a political decision. Those people that are in the one grand thing about America that we had in our past, and we should not forget, whenever the government no longer cares about the people, it is incumbent upon those people to rise up and overthrow that government. Whenever the Democrats and the Republicans together collectively have decided that we are of no consequence, that is a very frightening position to be in. And I got to tell you right now, the only thing that the Democrats are interested in is whether or not they're going to win this election. The only thing the Republicans are interested in is nobody will think that they're not a Democrat. I don't understand it. That's mean. But I think that it is interesting because the Nazis were defeated before they could put that plan in effect, but that's what they wanted. And there has been, and I have all of these here, that almost every one of the great famines of the world has been caused by a political decision. Like, for instance, and you wouldn't think it's possible, but you know, sometimes people that get into authority thinks that they're the greatest experts all, and Mao Zedong in China, he decided it would be a grand thing if the people would work for the government. Just work for the government. Sounds like the United States. But back in those days, worked for the government. So he put these little compounds together, and he would put 5,000 people in these compounds to work. And the food that they produced would go to the government. And they wanted more and more wheat in China because China was gone through some starvation. So what this great man of science did, he said, somebody told him that the sparrows were eating too much grain, the sparrows. So he put an edict out that all of the farmers were to beat pans and pots and everything else all around the fields to make sure that no sparrows could land in the field. Huh? He's going to save the wheat. Sounds like a good plan, don't it? Here's the problem. Politicians are often stupid. Just wanted to point that out. I don't know why. It's kind of like, of course, though, we're no better. If we would need an opinion, we'd say, I wonder if we could get a hold of Justin Bieber and see what his opinion is, or maybe some athlete and get his opinion. That would be the grandest thing. If we could get the opinions of Hollywood, that would help us make... I need duct tape on my head right now. I'm about to explode. So, it sounded like a good plan. They're going to save wheat. Well, here's the problem. The sparrows couldn't land. They were falling out of the sky, dying, because they couldn't eat, couldn't rest. And here's one of the other things the sparrows were doing. They were picking not just wheat, but they were picking eggs and things and locusts and killing locusts and bugs, and they were eating those too. But now there's no sparrow to eat the locusts. And the locusts come up and ate all of the wheat. Because, and by the way, God said, I know when a sparrow falls. So he deserved what he got. Him, unfortunately, because he was a ruler, no starvation came to him, just the people. And that, my friends, is a thing that I fear too, is that only the elite. So there is a possibility when it refers to the oil and the wine, that only the elite, the rich people, will be okay. Or there might be pockets of where there's great food and so on and so forth. Are you all still following me if I got too fast? And I don't want to miss this stuff because I want you to understand. So by the way, just recently, and I don't think that we understand it, but, well, he estimates that this man-made famine just recently inflicted on the Soviet, or actually on Ukraine, by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, killed about 3.3 million, and he wanted it to be so. 3.3 million. I don't know. We're talking about a virus that may kill 250, 300,000, maybe. Who knows? But these people are dealing in millions and millions of people's deaths by bad political decisions. And we got a lot of bad political decisions that are happening today. If America doesn't go back to work, America's not going to survive. So we say, well, no, we can't go back to work. We got to protect. Let me tell you something, and it's really interesting. Like that, I was listening to that professor from Stanford, and he's saying, I think it was Stanford. His last name is Atlas. I have to check that out. Anyway, he was talking about the fact that what they don't tell us, what they will not tell us, is things that we should know. Like, for instance, he said the kids can't go to school. He said, and it's a disaster. He said we are abusing our children by not allowing them to go to school. And they said, oh no, because we're protecting them. Children go to school, and usually they get their breakfast and lunch, the only meals that they get at school. Children go to school, and the number one person to identify child abuse in the home is the teacher. So these kids, nobody's there for them. And here's the other thing. Kids are going to school, they work 12 years to get a graduation, and they don't get a graduation. Teen suicides are up. Because they're looking to the future, and nobody's talking about hope. Nobody's talking about the fact that God is still in control. They don't understand. All of this is politics in its finest form. And I know I'm going to get in trouble. Somebody's going to look at this and saying that I said that there's no such thing as this virus. And of course, you just don't get it. Because that's not what I said. What I said was, if you're well, you ought to work. If you're sick, you ought to stay home. There you go. It's pretty simple. I don't think that would, and by the way, again, they don't want to tell us the real facts, and the real facts is that most people that get the coronavirus survive. The chances of you dying is 0.004%. The chance of you living would be then 99.06. I'm not really good with math, so if I mess that up, and you want to criticize me later, and you do that often when you contact me on the email, and I'm not giving you my email address because I don't like you anymore. And I like to point out I am no mathematician, and I know that. The point is that they had this thing in China called the Great Leap Forward, and he killed off half of his population because he was so smart about killing all. He declared war on the sparrows, accusing them of eating great quantities of grain seeds. And the government said the birds are public animals of capitalism. I tell you, everybody in the world blames America and capitalism for everything that happens. So the inhabitants built a water reservoir to irrigate and drain the fields and all this other stuff. And the problem with the Great Sparrow Campaign was clear to many farmers within months. Whenever the insects began to increase at an alarming rate, they knew that without those sparrows, they were in a world of trouble because they ate the insects. So, you just kind of, and that was in a book called Tombstone, and you should read it if you get a chance. It's boring as all get out, but I throw it out there. The most tragic aspect of the Great Famine is that even with Mao's faulty policies being relentlessly pursued, the bulk of the deaths were still unnecessary. Political. It was all political. But Mao's government refused to release. At the heart of it, he wrote journalists that the real cause was the communist government which either as policy or by selfish act of various officials kept the grain from being delivered to those that were in need. Because here's the thing, even though they were starving to death, the granaries were filled to capacity, but the emperor Mao would not release the grain. We have a problem when those that have the scales are in bad hands. And remember, the black horse and he that sat upon him had a set of scales. That means he's in control of the food and how much you get. What is your worth? And he's the one that decides what your worth is. And so when and the thing is, starvation is back in a lot of places. He was writing this fellow that I talked to you about, DeWall, was writing a history on famine, and but unfortunately, he said famine is making something of a comeback today, not only in Africa but in other places. More and more famine is coming. Well, you know, we don't think that that's going to bother us, but if those famine alarm bells are ringing, maybe we ought to give careful consideration to some things that we can do. I really believe that every person should be able to support themselves. I would prefer that you could support yourself for 6 months without having to worry about the government's help in any way, form, or fashion. And so I told you this some years ago. Some of you listened. Some of you thought that I was crazy then, and you'll probably think I'm crazy after this too. But I'm kind of getting used to my crazy, so I'm all right. But here's the thing. Why it's important for you to try your very best to be a little bit more self-supporting is things come and we're not prepared for it. I got to tell you, if the electric grid was to go down, and there are a multitude of scenarios that the think tanks have out there about the grid going down, they estimate that it would take somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks before riots would break out in New York City, to the point where people would be dying on the streets. Those that had food, those that didn't, those protecting, and you think, well, maybe that wouldn't come here. When people are faced with hunger, they're not rational. It gets frightening. So I wonder, are we really listening to the warnings? Because the greatest problem that America has today is not our fields and our ability to produce food. It is the Nimrods that are in charge, that have the scales. And I believe that those people are influenced, controlled by the same feeling, that same spirit that runs with the white horse, the red horse, and now the black horse. And that is the spirit of Antichrist. David said, and David was a righteous man, and David was the king, and he said, I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor their seed begging bread. But that was David. He was a righteous man. He was a king. And if somebody would have been starving, David would have intervened, because he was a righteous man. He was king. But today, those people that have the scales are not righteous men. And they can do a great deal of damage by political indictments against us. When the global financial crisis struck back in 2008, I believe it was kind of a shot across the bow to let us know some things. We talked about it way back then. It was kind of a shot across the bow. Another warning came the following year when the U.S. Geological Survey published a report saying peak phosphorus production was only 24 years away, meaning production would begin failing as possible and precipitously after 2033. Now, I've heard that number, 2033, quite often here of late. You said, well, 2033, what does it really mean? I don't know. I got to tell you, I don't mean to say that I know when God is coming back, because the Bible said that only God our Father in heaven knows when he's coming back. But he said you'll know some of the signs of what's going on. And I got to tell you, when I'm teaching from the four writers of the apocalypse. People have written me saying, you're terrifying me. You don't talk anything good. You're just bad, bad, bad. Okay, I want to point out in my defense that when you're talking about the four writers of the apocalypse, there isn't anything good. You know, so I'd have to make it up to give it to you. So the thing is, and this, you say phosphorus, what does it mean to me? Well, here's the thing. In Morocco, little town, nothing, gambling, that's about it, right? Morocco, that's all we know about Morocco. It is home to 75% of the world's known phosphorus reserves. Morocco is. But there's a war going on. Remember that red horse I told you about? The people that are part of the Islamic faith feel that Morocco owns that, and they shouldn't. It belongs to them. And they're trying to get it back. They're trying to fight. So, and the next closest producer is China. How much phosphorus do we need phosphorus for anything? We might. The United States is the world's largest exporter of food. It obtains 42% of its phosphorus imports from Morocco, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, Lithuania, Canada, and also major importers of Moroccan phosphorus. It is amazing that our future food supply depends so much on what happens to this one country. Oh, no. Our food supply will always be there. We're the breadbasket of America. But we're dependent upon Morocco. No, Morocco's a little tiny two-digit fidget state. You don't have to worry about that. The United States is dependent upon the phosphorus production of Morocco, which is under warfare because the Islamic people want to take that land away from them so that they control the phosphorus. Phosphorus is used in the production of food, right? Now, I'm no farmer, but I think it has a lot to do with fertilizer. Maybe. Is there any farmers in my congregation at all? And if not, we need to get some because they can produce great amount of food. So, matters of fact, he uses the word, a better word than amazing, maybe alarming, and the alarm becomes far more intense in the light of the growing influence in Morocco of an actor that would relish the opportunity to decide who eats and who doesn't eat. Well, who's that? Iran. How did they get involved in this? It gets a little bit more complicated, and I'm about to lose all of you, I'm sure. But on May 1st, the Moroccan government announced they had evidence that Iran was using its terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, to support a separatist group called the Polisario Front. And Polisario has been fighting for the independence of Western Sahara, a region claimed by the Moroccan government, and this dispute has raged for more than 25 years already. And Morocco's cake of phosphorus is split between Western Sahara and the rest of the country, and the Moroccan government can't say how much of it lies in Western Sahara. And so the point is that if indeed Iran is involved in this, and if indeed they lose this, it's going to have a detrimental effect on the United States because we are globalists, and we depend on everybody else to help us. Have I lost you now? You want me to go on, or are you just so tired of this? Well, I am trying to hurry, but so in other nations this would be worrisome, but since the world's food supplies depend so heavily on Morocco's phosphorus, then it becomes alarming. How is that even possible? That little tiny country could affect us. So we need, by the way, to be deeply worried about those kind of things with the situation in Morocco and the new crisis in Somalia and Sudan, Syria, Nigeria, Yemen. And all of these are authoritarian governments that hold the scales for all of their people, and they decide, but how could they possibly influence us? Most of you know that China and Russia is not our friend. And China and Russia are putting a pact together for them as well, so that they have this constant flow of trade between the two of them, and the United States is going to be left out because the United States is very soon it's not going to be one of the major players on the world market. Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, and several other nations shows that the resurgence of such ideologies and practices about who controls the food supply is well underway. Because if you can control the food supply, remember, we've had deception, 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 all of this stuff, so that everything that I say tonight, somebody is going to refute. Probably before the week is over, you're going to hear somebody refute everything that I've said, probably. And they say, no, it's not that bad. Let me just say, I haven't been wrong yet because I only have one source that I really depend on, and that is the Scripture. I think Vesta told me today, she said she remembered, and I said all of this stuff 3.5 years ago. There's another fellow down in Kentucky. His last name, what is his first name? Dana. God has given him visions over the last little bit of time. And he doesn't mind telling you, he said, look, I don't know that I'm a prophet. I don't know how to tell you. I'm just telling you that God has told us that something is going to happen in the month of October, November this year. Does that sound familiar to any of you? The black horse is going to ride. And look, the white horse has ridden. Yes? I mean, he's been here. We know about it. The red horse has ridden. We know it. The black horse, so far, hasn't been seen, but he's going to be seen soon. And the biblical book of Revelation is about things that shall be hereafter, or occurrences that would take place after the era of the Apostle John. In Revelation, he discusses the 7 seals, the things that happen, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they represent religious deception, war, famine, pestilence. Well, here's the thing. There is one writer who said that he felt that the oil and the wine, we already know that food shortage is going to be there. One day, a whole day's work for a loaf of bread. Actually, it's worse than that. But anyway, he felt that the oil and the wine was related to wealth that we really didn't need because it is a luxury item. I think it has another meaning. Of course, so I'm a pre-tribulationist or a mid-tribulationist. And so as a mid-tribulationist thing, and I'm going to be here for a while, and I believe that we're going to see a lot of these things. Now, yes, Coverstone. Now, I got to tell you, that's a great name for a prophet. Coverstone. Dana Coverstone. Yes. Now, I thought it was interesting because of the fact that his vision almost mimicked mine to the. And by the way, 3.5 years, 4 years ago now, I guess it's 3.5 years ago, God gave me a vision. He said, these things are going to occur. And I took a risk 3.5 years ago. I told the church, these things are going to occur. And everybody looked at me 3.5 years ago saying, and I get it, I understand. What prophet likes to say stuff like this and find out that somebody's going to question him for the next 3.5 years? Where is it, preacher? Ta-da! And he felt that this was just an indication of where, the rich things, maybe pockets of rich and pockets of plenty. I think that might mean something else. I think that he said, be careful not to touch or to hurt the oil and the wine. I believe it represents the church. I believe God is saying that even in the midst of this, I'm going to protect my own. That's where I feel. Now, is it talking about riches? Yeah. Are we going to need those rich things? I've got to tell you something. Yeah, it's hard to fry something without some oil. But the oil represents the Holy Spirit, does it not? And the wine represents what? It represents the Holy Spirit too. So don't touch those things that are sacrosanct. those things that I'm going to protect. And because you have kept the word of my patience, I will keep thee. I think there's a possibility that God is saying there are some things I'm going to protect. I also think that it might be that wine keeps pretty well, right? For all of you Baptists out there that are going to get mad about what I'm going to say, I would just like to point out that I would suggest, I am going down big time. I would suggest that you get some wine. Don't drink it. Seal it. Y'all remember the Samaritan? He found the boy that was beaten up and put off to the side. The Bible says that he poured wine and oil on his wounds. Well, the wine acted as a cathartic and killed off the germs. The oil would help to seal it so other germs wouldn't come in. We don't know what kind of medicine we're going to have access to in the future. So having a little extra medicine around your house. Now, I'd like to point out that he said this, take a little wine for your often infirmities and your stomach's sake. It may be something that is applicable here, but if I catch you in a bar, I'm going to get so mad at you. There is a difference here. I'm not talking about dirty, filthy, disgusting things. I'm talking about preparing for a future that we're unsure of. And I know that every one of the Free Will Baptists that I know are going to be mad about what I just said. And I get it, I understand. I do not drink at all. I'm a teetotaler. But I think in the future it might be advisable for you to have something in your medical kit that might be helpful. He did pour the wine and the oil on the man that was beaten so badly. That's how he tended the wounds. And we don't know what we're going to have in the future, but it might be something that you need to help in medicine itself. I don't know. Hopefully none of this stuff is going to happen. That would be the best scenario. But looking at our current governance, I think it's going to happen. Because we have got such a divide in America that we're in trouble. We are in trouble. How much time do I have? Oh, man. And did I say I was hurrying? Because apparently I got serious problems with my hurry. The amount of food to support a man for a day and a penny refers to the usual daily pay of a laborer, and the soldier an entire day's wage would allow a man to buy enough wheat to feed himself for that same day, or he could buy enough of the less nutritious barley to feed 3, making the feeding of a family nearly impossible. And I think if you're not preparing for the future, I think you might find yourself just barely scraping by. And maybe with some of the things that you've prepared, it would be an adjunct to help you during those days. Now, again, I'd like to point out that if the pre-tribulationists are right, you don't need to worry about anything that I've said. You're leaving before it ever happens. If I'm right, and you don't have any preparation, don't come try to buy my oil, because I ain't giving it to you. You just have to starve on my front porch. I have to watch you. It's going to be sad. But then again, if food gets tough and you drop, by the way, you think that that's an impossibility? Famine has produced more cannibals than anything else. No, that can't be. We are not discussing any old dusty prophecy when we're talking about the Bible. There are dire prophecies that are being fulfilled for us every single solitary day of our life. And the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse stressing that these prophecies are for the present age. And they are. Every corner of the earth, God is trying his very best to say, I told you beforehand that all these things must come to pass. so that you will understand that I'm God. And I didn't leave you without a warning. I didn't leave you without the ability to change it all. God is still calling men and women, boys and girls to repentance, and I don't know that they're listening. But here's the thing. The scriptures reveal that the gains against famine that mankind has made in recent years is soon going to wither away. We see it happening all over the world today. It hasn't come here yet, but it will. If, for instance, we no longer have access to phosphorus, our food production will be cut in half. In half. We wouldn't even be able to feed ourselves. Each individual, and you know, I think that we look at this and we say that's very bleak. All the stuff that you're talking about is very bleak. But God has given us a way to escape all of those things. Whether we leave in the rapture before it all happens, or whether we leave in the middle, God said, I'm going to protect you. If I was you, I'd join up, get yourself situated, on board, because things are happening very rapidly anymore. And I think that God wants us to surrender to Him. Amen? And that's what it's all about. He's saying, I'm trying to get the world back to repentance. Almost every time there's been a cataclysmic situation, the church has increased. I got to tell you, I appreciate the Wednesday night crowd. Our Wednesday night crowd has doubled since I started talking about the 4 riders of the apocalypse. And well, why? Because, I mean, everything that I've said is frightening. People like a good scare every now and then, I guess. But it might get us closer to realize. And, you know, the thing is, I think the people that are going to be more taken by surprise than any other is good, moral people thinking that, well, God just wouldn't do anything like this. Well, yes, He will. Because He's coming back. And He's trying to tell us to look for these things. Next time we talk about the last horse. You guys still going to be here? Have you got tired of it yet? Would you like me to teach something that is really happy? To maybe give you like a week off and teach merriment? You might want to learn this stuff, because I got to tell you, you know, I thought that that gentleman's prophecy was interesting, because Coverstone's prophecy, Dana, because he didn't want to. He was trying to say, look, I don't know why God has given me this. He said, but I feel that I must say it because, and he said, I'm sure that if I'm wrong, he said, all of you could come to me after I'm wrong, after October, November, and tell me that you are so wrong. And he said, I'll be so happy to be so wrong. But his contention is that he believes that somewhere between October and November, that Washington, D.C. will be on fire. On fire. Burning. He talked about, and he doesn't talk about things that are not conceivable. He talks about things that are very, very real. Now, I don't know that, I'm not saying that it won't be a physical fire, but I do believe that there's going to be a spiritual fire that's going to happen in October and November. And the reason I say that is because I think that somebody's going to try to take away our vote. And it is going to cause an uprising. And they're going to couch it with saying, well, we can't have the vote like we've had in the past because of the coronavirus. You can go to all these other stores and with the coronavirus and get your groceries and get whatever you need from all the stores, but you won't be able to vote. That's very silly. But I do believe that something is happening now And there's other things that are happening now. Like, for instance, what is that gentleman that was such a pervert? Well, Biden and the other one. No. Epstein. And they recently, his assistant, girlfriend was, she turned herself in because she's afraid she's going to die. And maybe so, because she may have England's M6 or M5 or M1 or whatever their CIA is after her. Our CIA is after her. Because they use that organization to trap people. They don't want that out. There's a lot of things disappearing. I don't know if you've noticed it. Some of the programs that were on TV are going away. I don't know if you guys heard that or not. A lot of people involved in this chicanery. And a lot of people are going to fall. And if they decide to tell the truth. So we don't know if that's going to happen either, do we? The world is changing. God's still on the throne. The world is getting really weird, but God is still on the throne. And he said, I want you to understand that down here there are no continuing cities. He said, but I hold you in the palm of my hand. Understand this, that no matter how bad it gets out there, those of you that love the Lord, He'll find a way to protect you, keep you. Don't lose hope. Yes? Very much aware that you cannot isolate from the virus. It's moving. You can wear all the masks right. And all it takes is touch. Those of you that would, I'm going to go to prayer, but I just want to tell you that if you want to continue to put your money on your local pantry and service, and that's what we're using for right now. Let us bow our heads one more time. Father,